we are going to end the day with talking about how to safeguard your project against fraud. So this is a really important topic, and I'm hopeful that these are not issues that we run into this year, but we always like to cover them in depth so that everybody is really aware of what we expect. So well, let's get into it. If it will let me advance the slide. Okay, so what is fraud? Fraud is an illegal act that involves obtaining something of value through willful misrepresentation. I want you guys to keep track of that phrase, willful misrepresentation, because I'm going to say it a lot. It's our responsibility as project directors, financial officers, agency administrators, program managers to really work together to maintain a system of checks and balances that safeguard our projects against fraudulent activity. And I know Sam talked a lot about what kind of documentation we really need from you guys in order to kind of prove that you guys have spent the money appropriately and that it's reimbursable on our part. So investigations around the nation have continually detected cases of fraud involving subgrantees receiving federal highway safety grant funds. Unfortunately, these investigations result in instances where states have had to recover funds from subgrantees or pay back the federal funding themselves, sometimes in very sizable amounts. Some investigations have resulted in criminal charges. Oklahoma is not an exception in these instances. Yes, it has happened here. The Office of the Inspector General has identified personnel service grants involving law enforcement overtime and those containing subcontracts are at high risk for fraud. Okay, so that's why we really, our documentation from you guys really needs, you've got to have your ducks in a row to be able to really get reimbursed, and your program managers are going to stay on you like a chicken on a June bug. So take note of that phrase, willful misrepresentation. That's the problem. We understand the difference between misrepresentation and mistakes. Mistakes happen often. We'll come back to this a few times over the course of this specific section of this presentation, but I want you guys to keep track of that willful misrepresentation, and Nicole has put that in the chat as well. Doing it on purpose with the intention of defrauding the Highway Safety Office and federal funds kind of in addition to that, that's the problem. Making a mistake, that's not a problem. And we are experienced enough here in our office to be able to tell the difference. So we can help you guys with that. So this is the Federal False Claims Act. This is the actual law that details the penalties for committing fraud with federal funds. And Nicole, can you copy and paste that 31 US code into the chat so that people can come back to it if they need to? That would be great. Chickens and ducks, yes. And I'm trying to get the slide to advance. All right. So red flags. How do you know what to look for? And I really want to kind of preface this by saying financial officers. Raise your hand if you're here in a financial officer capacity. Financial officers, this is really going to involve you guys on a deep level in regard to verifying that the funds were spent because these are reimbursement grants. So all these funds have to be spent first. So project directors, you guys are really responsible for making sure that the activity happens, making sure that the work happens really in association with what your grant says. And if you are new to this, we will help you. That's what your program managers are here for. So how do you know what to look for? Experienced project directors and financial officers really have an advantage here because you guys are familiar with customary project documentation and can usually spot things that are out of the ordinary pretty quick. For those of you who are newer to managing highway safety projects, here's some red flags that you're gonna look for. This is not a comprehensive list, okay? These are just a few items that we want you to consider. You know your agency's personnel. Your agency's administration should be apprised of and involved in project-related decisions, including any changes. They are your ally, and you might need their expertise in the event that you find something of concern with the grant. If you've communicated all the parameters of conducting grant activities and proper documentation, the ultimate responsibility does fall upon the individual personnel conducting these activities. You often have little choice than to trust that your people are conducting themselves with integrity. Trust but verify. Wait, what was it Katie used to say? Trust your neighbor but brand your cows. Okay, so you need to trust your people and make sure that they have all of the information that they need to do grant activity, to conduct grant activity appropriately. But it's your job as the project director or the agency administrator to really verify those things. So often your agency personnel's behavior alone will provide either consistency in performance or a lack of acceptable performance that can be a catalyst for additional verification action. Like I said, trust your neighbors, but brand your cows. Under procedural, under behavioral, let's go back. Behavioral, unusual work schedules. If you see somebody that normally works day shift is out doing a grant shift and they went on duty at 2 a.m. and they normally get off at 4 a.m. and they're going to work a couple of hours and then have a break in between, that's kind of rare for us. So you might take a look at that and see if they actually did do the shift. They're going to have to log the citations and the warnings that they wrote. They need to go on duty and off duty with dispatch. So, and we're going to kind of talk about all of those things that you guys can do to really verify that that stuff happened. But inconsistent or illogical explanations of discrepancies, lack of response to communications. If you start emailing your people wanting verification or wanting more information about the shifts that they work or the activity that they conducted and they just don't get back to you, that's a problem. And then lack of supervision during grant procedures. So those lack of supervisor signatures and you having to go back and get those, and those supervisor signatures on the activity sheets can really be signed by the supervisor on shift or could be signed by you as the project director if you're going to be the supervisor over the project. It's really up to you on how you want to conduct those, but just know that whoever is signing those activity sheets and signing that this activity happened has verified that that activity has happened. So make sure that you're doing your due diligence before we do our due diligence.
Hey,
Let's
Kelly,
go down to yeah.
We might have a question from Jennifer Ross.
Okay, Jennifer, do you have a question, or were you raising your hand because I told finance people to raise their hands? Maybe. You can let me know in the chat. Okay, so let's go to procedural. Like I said, these lists are not comprehensive, but again, you should have established contact and communication with anyone who's involved in grant activity or documentation. These people can be citizens in your community too. Be sure to follow up on complaints, follow up on reports that do not meet standards, and note when project personnel are not openly responding to those communications, like I said. This provides the appearance that you are rigorously reviewing every aspect of grant activity, documentation, communication without bias, and it really discourages substandard conduct. So there we go. All right, good, Jennifer. Let's move forward into transactional red flags. As project director or financial officer, you're going to be reviewing a number of transactional documents, including time accountability, activity reports, payroll, travel documents, invoices, expenditure reports, shift assignments, and other project-related documentation. Grant recipients are required to submit a monthly report and a reimbursement request that puts all these items together for the particular reporting period. Happens monthly. Some people, I know Jacqueline mentioned it yesterday, some people have to get paid bi-weekly or have different kind of pay cycles. And so what you have to do is just take the 26 weeks of the year and divide it up into 12 sections. And those can be your monthly reports. It doesn't have to be like January 1 to January 31st. So that happens monthly. This allows you the opportunity to notice discrepancies and make corrections before you submit the report to OSO. Now, I'm going to speak on behalf of all program managers. We would love you to catch those mistakes before they get to us. We're processing a lot of reports every month, and it would really behoove you to catch all of those mistakes, missing signatures, activity that's questionable, missing documentation, anything like that. We want you guys to catch that yourself, okay? Give yourself sufficient time and opportunity for focused attention to review that documentation prior to submitting your report, and that will help you catch those mistakes. Try not to rush yourself. If you notice something out of the ordinary that could make reporting late, just email your program manager. It's okay. Just let us know. You know, hey, payroll's behind, or hey, recently we had an agency that switched their whole payroll reporting system, and so some of their reports were significantly behind, and that's okay. You just have to let us know. Just keep us up to date on what's happening in your agency. Okay. We can provide feedback that might assist you with any processes that you have in regard to late reporting and things, and we're going to want to know if those reports are going to be delayed. Your highway safety program manager will always prefer, like I said, that you find, correct, address, and report discrepancies prior to submitting your reports. I know, John. I was referring to you, but I didn't want to throw you under any buses. Again, willful misrepresentation is the problem, okay? Mistakes are not the problem. Doing it on purpose for the sole purpose of defrauding, the Highway Safety Office, that's problematic. So, and we're good at catching it. All right, let's go into common fraudulent activities. Here's a list. Where individual project personnel are required to self-report without independent verification, there can be risk. Making sure there's a system in place to independently verify their participation, location, time, and particular activity assists us in providing assurances that accurate self-reporting occurs. Let your project personnel know about your agency's system of verification. Also, make sure to emphasize the fraud statement, and Sam talked a lot about it, the fraud statement that officers and supervisors sign at the bottom of enforcement activity sheets. That fraud statement does state, and I think I've got a slide on it in a little bit, does state that you're assuring that this activity happened and that it is reimbursable. So keep in mind and let your supervisors know that are going to be signing that supervisor line, not to just get a pen and, sign everything, flip through the pages and sign everything. It's their job. They're signing to make sure and verify that that activity happens. Administrative time for reporting and supervision are an area of frequent misuse. The amount of time reported for these activities really does need to fit what would be considered customary for the circumstances. And Brian said something earlier about, does it pass the laugh test? I think is what he called it. So if you arrest a DUI, you have an officer that makes a DUI arrest, we are pretty familiar with how long that normally takes. So if they're starting to report 12 hours for a DUI arrest, we're going to ask them questions because it doesn't take quite that long typically. But if there are extenuating circumstances and you have, appropriate documentation and explanation for that, then let's have a conversation. And that's really between you and your program manager. If an officer is if an officer is on duty for a regular shift, they are regular 10-8. They cannot work overtime. In addition, if an officer is on duty for a regular shift and stops a DUI or another sizable arrest, they don't get on the radio and tell dispatch they're off duty for regular shift and on duty for highway safety just so they can earn overtime for that. That is fraud. That is willful misrepresentation of their time. So they're not going to go on duty for traffic safety so that they earn overtime for that particular stop. That's a question that we get, and that's a problem. Vendors and subcontractors for your project are held to the same standards as you, the grantee. Actual hours devoted to the project, customary costs associated with services or equipment, and appropriate documentation are required. Kevin, I see your question and I'll come back to it. Hourly wages are usually provided up front prior to the execution of the grant agreement, including quotes for any detailed costs for services or products provided by your vendor. So this is important if you are buying equipment this year. If you have questions about it, get with your program manager. We will help you, okay? Just remember, willful misrepresentation is a problem. We understand that mistakes happen. Kevin, what is the allowable time you typically give for a DUI? Most of the DUIs that we see are around 4 hours. Because we can reimburse the time it takes to fill out the charge packet. And it really depends on if you had to take them to the hospital, if you had to, if you're traveled, if you had to wait for a wrecker, but all of that really does need to be documented on the activity sheet. So we know what they were doing for that period of time. We also know, and I'll say this too, we also know that a DUI or another sizable arrest like that is going to put a little bit of a kink in your stops per hour, because if you're out there working a DUI for 4 hours, you're not getting 8 stops in those 4 hours. So we understand that, we know that. And as long as we can see the activity sheet and know what they were doing for the period of time they're claiming, no problem, okay? No problem. Willful misrepresentation. Can you repeat what you said about paperwork? What part? Let me know, LaDawn. Okay. Now let's go over our prevention strategy, paying for paperwork, for charges for things like charge packets. So if somebody gets a DUI arrest and goes back to the sheriff's office and sits down and completes their charge packet, we can pay for that time. They really do need to do that while they're still on overtime. If they don't fill out their charge packet and they just charge us 4 hours for that, but they're not filling out their charge packet until they're 10/8 the next day, that's problematic. So if they want to go back and finish their charge packet after they drop them off at county, pick finish their charge packet and get that done, we can pay for that time. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so here's highway safety prevention strategies. And a lot of these were covered by Sam earlier when we were talking about monitoring reports and the documentation that we do before the award happens. So prevention starts when your agency submits a pre-application to highway safety. And reminder, that happens in December coming up for FY24. So start getting your ducks in a row now. Agencies are required to answer questions related to their financial history. Your program manager is going to complete that risk assessment around the time that agreements are being completed for the coming fiscal year. And chances are for FY23, you've already got a risk assessment filled out and in your grant agreement in OGX. We're going to verify the answers to your questions in the pre-application, and we're going to review your agency's past performance. The results of the risk assessment are going to determine the minimum level of monitoring that your program manager conducts, and that's the visits that Sam was talking about earlier. Your attendance and participation in this training is another safeguard that we provide. We want every project to be monumentally successful. We don't want to have any problems. We don't want to have any investigations into fraud. We don't want any of those things. We want all of your reports to be accurate. We want you guys to really drive down the numbers of fatality and serious injury crashes in our state. So we want you to have all the tools that you need to be successful. It's your job to know your agency's policies regarding inventory and purchasing, especially if you have equipment or other item purchases listed in your project. So we should already have your inventory control and purchasing policies. So we would have contacted you for that already. Your agency is required to submit a single audit report on an annual basis. Our Chief of Finance usually reviews the report and follows up on any concerns, and you'll hear from our staff when it's time to submit that. It is beneficial to have separate roles for reporting programmatic information and financial information, but it's not required. The same individual shouldn't really be responsible for payroll and verifying hours and assigning shifts and maintaining programmatic reports for the grant. The system at Highway Safety enhances this separation of duties as the reimbursement is independently reviewed by both your program manager and our finance personnel prior to reimbursement. I see this. The activity sheets should note things on the shift that are not typical. Yes, yes. I love explanations. I love activity sheets that have notes on them. Absolutely, Carly. Okay. Required monthly reporting provides an opportunity to carefully consider and review each document that is related to the project. As project director or finance officer, you will become familiar with project documentation and be able to detect anything out of the ordinary. Your program manager and Highway Safety Administration is going to review all the documents you submit and all the reports that you submit. Periodic monitoring by your program manager measures the success of your project. We keep track of how much money you've spent, how much of the money you should have spent to date have you spent, how many of the traffic stops that you should have conducted year to date have you done, and we can put that in a percentage for you. So if you ever want to know, reach out and ask your program manager. We can tell you. We keep track of how much money you have left in the project, and that really does come straight from the reports that you submit. And this was mentioned yesterday, and it might have been mentioned as well this morning. That's why it's also important for you to keep your reports up to date, because if we only have reports through May and it's August and you want to know how much money you have left for September, I can only tell you how much money you have since May because I don't know. I don't have your documentation. That's why it's so important for you to stay up to date. Make sure you know when personnel changes have occurred in your system and familiarize new people with grant policies and procedures. We can also do that. We can come out and sit with you guys. I know for my project for FY23, I have a lot of meetings already scheduled from very late October through the end of November. I think I have one the first week of December as well, to come out and really teach, especially new projects, teach you guys how to sit down and do the report. Because if you learn by doing, it's a really great opportunity for you to submit your first report with us sitting in the chair next to you and helping you guys do that. And program managers can do that. We have the ability to come see you, and people like me love to come out and see you face to face. I am not a fan of this video stuff. All right. So finally, we have a required disclaimer that appears on every timesheet and activity sheet provided to our office, and we'll talk about that. Here's the disclaimer. You'll see it on your activity sheets, so don't be surprised. Customarily, it appears just above or just below the employee signature and date line. And if you need to screenshot this or you need to get this out of the presentation later, and I actually think Dee sent it out yesterday, you can get this, send it out, make sure everybody knows that that's what they're going to be signing. All right, prevention strategies. Communicate your benchmarks, your goals, and your requirements and your deliverables on this project with all the personnel involved in the grant. I think what happens a lot of times is, your officers out on the street that are going to be working this project just know that you have a project, and that's it. Hey, we've got traffic safety hours. They don't know what kind of money it is. They don't know if it's impaired driving money, if it's occupant protection money, or if it's general traffic money. Make sure you are communicating that information to the people working the project, because ultimately, as the project director, that's your job to really make sure that everybody knows everything that they need to know to be successful. Inform the supervisors and the project personnel of the unique parameters of grant activity. That's what I'm talking about. If you have a specific kind of money, you need to make sure that they know that. If you don't know that, please ask your program manager. We can tell you, and definitely it's the 5th of October. We definitely want you guys to be starting out strong. Conduct periodic checks of agency systems and grant procedures, personnel changes, time and attendance quality checks, how they're using the forms, payroll documentation, grant activities, all those things. I've caught a few grants just in FY22 that were using an activity sheet that had the incorrect project number at the top because they had just used it from a previous year. That's okay, we could fix that, but I'd rather you catch that and use the proper project number so that all of our documentation is correct. And then maintain consistent communication with your program manager, because if you're not calling us, we're going to be calling you. I call my people all the time, so no worries. Okay, more prevention strategies, okay? If possible, officers should go on duty and off duty on grant shifts with dispatch. That is a safety thing anyway, and so I really want to stress that they should be doing that on regular shifts too. They should be going to 10-7 on grant shifts with dispatch. Tell dispatch, whatever, I'm on duty for traffic safety. That also lets dispatchers know, as a former dispatcher, it's very important for people to keep track of who's out and what they're doing. Everyone doesn't hit a time clock, so accountability can vary by agency and activity. So make sure all your project personnel know the policy. It is part of your system of checks and balances, okay? We want to know that dispatch knows that all of your people are out there and on duty, okay? You can have a sign-up sheet for shifts. You can plan high visibility enforcement, keep track of personnel participating in educational events, including dates and times. If you've got officers that are going out and doing a safety fair in the parking lot of Home Depot and setting up and handing out brochures and things like that, which we can send you for free, just contact your program manager. We can help you with that. If they're going out and setting up, at a safety fair and stuff, that's PI&E. That's public information and education. Their hours, if they're in overtime status, their hours are reimbursable, and you can claim that as a PI&E event in your report. So we can help you with that. So make sure that you, as the project director, are keeping track of those things. If project personnel leaves a highway safety shift to conduct duties outside of grant activity, they need to note the timeout and the time they come back to the highway safety shift if they do. That time cannot be claimed as highway safety grant time, okay? I'm gonna spend a tiny bit of time on this because we do get a lot of questions about this. If you have an officer that is out on a grant shift and there is a bank robbery, or there is a pursuit, or there is a shooting, or there is something terrible that another officer needs assistance, by all means, we want them to break off and go do their cop stuff. Okay, we understand that. Our office is very aware that, and we want everybody to stay safe in the performance of their duties. But if they're going out and doing something that is not their grant shift related, not related to that grant shift at all, by all means, they need to go off duty with dispatch and to let them know, I'm on the way to assist whatever unit with this barricade subject or whatever. We definitely want all hands on deck for those particular instances, but we can't pay for that time. So make sure that your administration knows that if somebody has to go off shift and go en route to go help somebody else do something else that's not highway safety related, we can't pay for that, and your agency is going to pick up the cost for whatever that is. Okay. On the timesheet or on the activity sheet, they can mark whatever stops and citations and warnings that they have already done, and then mark what time that they broke off to go help with something, and tell us what you did. You know, if you broke off to go help with a barricaded subject for 2 hours and then you came back and did some other grant shift, great. Just mark that time and then claim the appropriate hours at the top. Like I said, if we should be able to look at an activity sheet and know what an officer was doing for the whole time. Okay, big gaps in time, we're going to ask questions. All right. Salaried personnel should keep a daily activity log or a calendar detailing day-to-day tasks, events, appointments, travel to and from places. We need to know if, even with salaried personnel, we need to know what they were doing with the time that they're claiming. So it's not too hard to do. It's just you have to be thorough. All right. Now we're moving to the sad slides. If it'll switch for me. Womp womp. There it is. All right. If you suspect fraud, okay, if you're going through and you see, you know, something that's really suspicious and we haven't caught it, you catch it. And you're going through activity sheets, and then maybe you start going back a couple of months and you start seeing some things that are questionable, follow your agency's policies and procedures to notify your chain of command. Okay. Then notify us. All right. We would much rather hear about it and be, you know, brought into the circle of the conversation ahead of time. Okay. We don't like to be caught off guard by big, huge investigations that have already been happening for 6 months and nobody let us know. Okay. So use your best judgment and then contact your program manager. When it's appropriate, information can and should be pushed to your local district attorney, the state attorney general, or even the office of the inspector general. And there are a couple of numbers here on this slide for you. All right, questions, concerns, quandaries, anecdotes, jokes, all those things? Use your reactions. Let me know you're still here and you're awake. Nice. Hi, Todd. Thank you. And just know that all of the thoughts and prayers and everybody are with Sergeant Wells and your whole agency. You guys have had a really hard time lately. All right, Jeff, what if they roll up on an accident? First of all, Jeff, we don't say the word accident. A crash is not an accident, okay? It's a crash, collision, crunchy boom boom, whatever you want to call it, but not accident. All right, what if they roll up on a crash and it is caused by a traffic violation such as speed? Do they stay on highway safety and work the crash and issue the citation and warning? We would prefer that they call dispatch and have them send an officer that's 10-8 on regular shift to come over there and work that crash. That would be ideal. That would be an ideal use of funds. If you don't have anybody available, it's possible, and we have reimbursed that before. If any other program managers have any input on that, that's how I would answer that question. If you guys have an on duty, and Yukon usually would have an officer on duty that could come and work that crash. They won't be happy about it, but we would love for them to take over.